From 1723 until the early days of 1772, this site was the usual place for auction sales of most kinds in the city of Charleston, and especially the auction sales of enslaved people of African descent. Hi, this is Nick Butler from the Charleston County Public Library, and today I'm standing here on the east side of East Bay Street in downtown Charleston to answer some questions about the sales of enslaved people in the city of Charleston. Now, where I'm standing right now is directly north of the old Exchange building, and this is a site in 2016 that was memorialized by this historical marker acknowledging that from the 1770s to the 1850s, this was the most common site for outdoor auction sales of enslaved people. And this is a very popular site in the memory and the history of Charleston, but it doesn't really acknowledge all of the scope of places within the city where enslaved people were once sold. So in episodes number 125 and episode 126 of the Charleston Time Machine, I made a distinction between the sales of incoming people of African descent who are either coming from the Caribbean or coming directly from Africa and being sold in Charleston for the first time, and a distinction between those people and the people who were born here or who had been living in slavery for a while and were resold in Charleston at auction. So for the first variety of people, for those people who are just newly arriving, they were usually sold on board the ships that imported them or directly off the ship on the wharf next to them. And so where we are right now on the east side of East Bay Street is literally one of those historic wharves. This would have been Gillen's Wharf in the 18th century. But I want to talk more specifically about those people who were sold at auction, not here at the Exchange building, which opened in the 1770s, but before the Exchange building, as a site in early colonial Charleston that was known simply as the usual place. Now I'm standing here at the corner of Trad Street and East Bay Street. So technically I'm on the east side of East Bay Street, and I'm standing in the footprint of an old building that was once called the New Market House or the New Vendue House. But from 1723 until the early days of 1772, this site was the usual place for auction sales of most kinds in the city of Charleston, and especially the auction sales of enslaved people of African descent. So we know this because the newspapers of Charleston, which started publication in January of 1732, frequently advertised auction sales, auctions of horses, household furniture, real estate, and human beings at quote-unquote the usual place here in Charleston. So it took me a while to read through all the newspapers and do a lot of other research in archival sources looking for positive identification. But as I mentioned in episode 126 of the Charleston Time Machine, I'm confident that this site at the southeast corner of East Bay and Trad Street is the site of the usual place. There was once a building here that was actually called the Exchange Building or the Vendue House or the Market House. It was built in 1723 by Andrew Allen, who's a prominent merchant of that day. And the city of Charleston, well, before the city of Charleston existed, there was a brief incorporated Charles City that leased the building. And that Charles City disappeared after a couple of years, and it reverted back to unincorporated Charlestown. And the provincial government leased this building for the sales of all kinds of auction goods. The building that stood here was a two-story masonry structure. It was private offices on the top floor, and the ground floor was an elevated arcade, much like the old Exchange building at the other location we were just at, where it was open for perambulation and for meetings on the ground floor space. And later enclosed. So from 1723 onward, people were having auction sales under this elevated courtyard, if you will, an arcade, and in the shade on the north side of the building in the late morning and early afternoon when the sun was hot. So this was the site that nobody seems to remember as the usual sales for the auction sales of thousands of enslaved South Carolinians at this site that's not marked. Now here at the intersection of Trad and East Bay Street, there are historical markers for other things that we could talk about. But my purpose today was to draw attention to those forgotten sites of very common activities in the early days of Charleston, like the auction sales of enslaved people. So again, if you're interested in reading more about that topic, check out episodes number 125 and 126 on the Charleston Time Machine on the website of the Charleston County Public Library. And until next time, I'm Nick Butler, and I'll see you in the future.